Hi moms, my name is Jen and this is WEL Strength Training. Kind of weird talking to a camera instead of actual people, so sorry if there's some awkwardness in trying to do this all virtually. But anyway, I'm excited to teach you guys what I know. I am an exercise physiologist. I've worked in like every sector of fitness and exercise. Just a quick bio, kind of starting out as a personal trainer, group fitness instructor back in the day. I moved to corporate wellness for a while, and now I work in a clinical position. So I've accumulated, at least I like to think I've accumulated a lot of knowledge on the way, and I've worked with a lot of different people. So hopefully there's something in here for you. I would love to help all of you get started. If you have questions after you watch the video, I'm available to you. So I posted just a little quick PowerPoint on the exercises that we're gonna go over. The reason I chose these exercises is because they are compound movements or multi-joint movements, meaning kind of get the best or the most bang for your buck. All right, so the first half of this video is just kind of getting started. We'll learn the movements and just go over kind of the importance of form and technique and what you're going to be looking for with all these movements. I do suggest that if you are planning on doing some strength training regularly and you see yourself doing that into the future, that you pick up a set of dumbbells. The range kind of depends on where you're starting at and where you see yourself going, anywhere between like 5 and 30. Take a look at what we're doing and then decide. You can also use objects around the house that are weighted if you're not interested in getting a set of dumbbells. I'm looking over here in my basement. These are probably pretty light, but things like cans or something that has a little bit of weight to it. Another option could be something like a water jug for certain movements. All right, so going back to what we talked about earlier, the movements chosen, the exercises chosen, they are all multi-joint movements, which again, just more bang for your buck. You're moving more muscle at once instead of isolating little areas. The way I also set it up, I chose the exercises to cover all major muscle groups. So you'll notice on the PowerPoint you have push-pull. Your upper body movements are basically going to be push-pull movements. You have pressing and pulling in a horizontal plane and pressing and pulling in a vertical plane. We'll talk more about that. Your lower body movements, think movement at the hips, knees, and a little bit at the ankles as well. So the things you're doing for your lower body really should incorporate that. Hips, knees, ankles. Again, just working the most musculature there. So getting started here, we're going to start with the upper body stuff. Before we get started, I want to go over one thing. It has to do with technique, posture. You'll hear me say it a lot, so I think it's worth mentioning beforehand, and that is neutral spine. So what is neutral spine? If I'm standing nice and tall, shoulders down, I'm not going to flex, but I'm going to kind of pull my abs in slightly here, just so that I'm in a nice sturdy position. This is neutral spine, right? So basically the way my spine looks when I'm standing nice and tall. There's a natural little curve here in the lumbar spine, natural little curve here in the thoracic spine, this middle section. I want to see that when you're doing a lot of different movements. That's something I would look for if we were working one-on-one. We'll go over kind of how to keep that neutral spine when we get to especially some of our lower body stuff, because there's a real tendency to do things like this. And again, we'll touch more on that later. We'll also talk about how to program these exercises, meaning how do I put these in a routine, write a schedule for myself for the weeks or months to come at the end here, at the end of the beginner section anyway, before we move on to some of the barbell stuff later on. All right, so start with an overhead press. I'm going to choose my lighter dumbbells here, all right? Overhead is going to be more challenging, being upper body, than lower. So going to the lighter end of the spectrum, right here I have 10s, standing feet together, nice and tall. Dumbbells come right to my sides here. Elbow is just slightly lower than shoulder. Again, I'm going to keep that neutral spine, so I'm standing nice and tall. I can even squeeze my glutes a little bit, my butt muscles. I can squeeze or draw in my abs slightly to stay in that position, and I'm going to press directly overhead. I want to avoid doing something like this where I'm pressing in front of me. I want to avoid arching back like this, which two common things seen with the overhead press, especially when that weight is getting a little bit heavier. All right, guys, we're gonna move on to dumbbell bench. Show you what I'm doing here first before I lie down so you can actually see what's going on. We wanna think about the width of our grip, and when I say things like width of grip, usually there's a barbell here in my hand, so that makes a little more sense, kind of where you're placing on the barbell. But imagine, you know, the difference between here and something like this. That's what I'm referring to by width of grip. I want about a 45-degree angle at the shoulder. Let's rephrase, let's call it that. 45-degree angle at the shoulder, meaning I'm a little bit narrower here. I'm going to press straight up, kind of above the shoulder, back down, up, down. Shoulder or elbow can drop a little bit below shoulder, kind of what you're comfortable with. As a beginner, if you like to be here versus down here, that's just fine. Some of it's based on just how comfortable it is here, your shoulder mobility. As for weight, going kind of middle ground here, you should be able, in theory, to lift more in a bench press than an overhead press because of the musculature you're using. So I've got my 20s over here. I'm gonna lay down. I want to make sure my shoulder blades, my butt, and my feet are all nice and flat, either against the bench or the floor. Weights are going to come up over my chest, over my kind of chest shoulders actually, down, up, down, up. My breathing, inhale down, exhale up. So before I forget to say this, dumbbell bench, you can do it on a bench. You can even just lie down on the floor. Your range of motion will shorten a little bit as your arms hit the floor, but that's okay. You could also do a push-up in place. I like the idea of doing a push-up on like a countertop or a chair, something sturdy, but something that gives you a little bit of an angle, so it makes it a little more manageable. We could do, of course I have weights all over the place, let me scoot them. I could do a push-up here, same kind of positioning, same grip as I go down and up. My breathing, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. I'm going to exhale as I'm pushing up against gravity. All right, we're going to move on to a dumbbell row. This is going to be your horizontal pull. I'll get to this later, but vertical pulls are kind of a challenge to do at home, just because of having to work against gravity, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Dumbbell row can be done on a bench if you have a bench, or with a hand on something about the height of this bench, maybe a chair. I'm going to show you the bench first because it's easiest to get into that position, and then I'll show you a hand on, let's say it's a chair. So dumbbell bench here, dumbbell row. Hand flat on the bench, the foot that's down is, or the side you're rowing on, that foot is going to be down on the floor. Again, I'm going to choose a weight that's kind of middle ground. Here I'm going to grab my 20. First things first, before I do anything, I want to think about the position I'm in. I want to think about my technique, my form. So here's that neutral spine again. This is one of those exercises, it's really easy to get out of position, kind of get lazy here, especially as we have a weight hanging at our side. It's easy to kind of round out the shoulders. So what I want to think about doing is kind of squeezing those shoulder blades together, dropping them down. If you've ever worked with a trainer or someone who's kind of had that background, a lot of times they'll say put your shoulder blades in your back pocket. So it's kind of squeezing them together, pushing them down, or lowering the shoulders, bringing them back. That is what we're looking for. So as I think about getting into position here, grab my weight. So think about my posture. Hopefully it looks pretty good. Now I'm just gonna pull, keeping that elbow tight to the body. So I want to avoid doing any sort of chicken wing kind of thing. And I'll count out my repetitions. Repetitions, number that we're going to do in a row. We'll talk about more about that later. Drop, and I'd switch sides. What I do on one side, of course, I want to do on the other. Looks basically the same when I do it standing. It's just a little bit harder to get into that position. If you have tight hamstrings, you're going to have a little bend in the knee. If you're very flexible, legs might be straight, that's just fine. Doesn't really matter. You just want to make sure you're keeping that posture throughout the whole thing. So I can kind of rest on that arm. But again, I want that nice neutral spine position. So starting here, pulling and counting them out. The other thing I should mention, neutral spine, that includes the cervical spine here, the neck. So I want to avoid doing this kind of thing where I'm super hyperextended looking back. You'll hear me talk about that a lot during the deadlift when we get to it, because that becomes a bigger deal as we lift more and more weight. Okay guys, so I mentioned our push-pulls, horizontal, vertical. Vertical pulls, right? They're a little bit more challenging to do at home because when we work with free weights, we have to work against gravity, right? So unless you're able to do like a chin up or a pull up on your own, you got to get a little bit creative here. There's not really a whole lot you can do with dumbbells. If you do have resistance bands, you can hook them. I keep looking over here because there's a bar on our rack. You could hook them above you and do a pull like this. That's an option at home. But I do want to talk about, okay, we're going to cut there. Okay guys, so let's talk about vertical pulls again. When you're working with free weights, we have to think about gravity, working against gravity, and that makes our vertical pulls kind of hard to do at home. Can't really do them with a dumbbell. If you do have a set of bands, you could always hook a band up above you. I'm looking over here, I have a rack. I could hook a band up to that, and either standing or depending on how high up it is, you could always pull here from like a kneeling position. That's one option at home. Or really, if you have a gym membership, maybe you're not using it now with COVID, but in the future, you have a gym membership, you're using the weight room, a lat pull is a great one. Go for that. So lat pull, it's got the cable, the long bar hanging down from it. I'm sure you've seen people use it. If you're a gym goer and you've been in the weight room, it's very popular. What I'm going to do with a lat pull is lean back slightly. I've got my bar. I'm going to take a grip just kind of outside shoulder width here. And I'm going to pull to my collarbone. That's important. I'm not pulling down to my chest. I'm pulling right here, kind of just below the collarbone is fine, but I want to make sure I get that nice angle where I'm squeezing my shoulder blades back together, so I'm retracting here. That's probably your best bet. Or they have the assisted like pull-up, chin-up machines, or if you can, work on chin-ups, pull-ups. That's probably your best vertical pull, but it does take quite a bit of strength to kind of work your way up to being able to pull your own body weight up. But those are kind of the best I can offer you from a vertical pull standpoint. If you don't want to mess around with that, you can always throw in additional sets of like rows, dumbbell rows, or any kind of row to get that extra volume and to make sure you're working your back. Moving on to lower body here, let's just do our split squat right now because it's really easy to kind of get into a position for, and you really don't need any additional weight unless you would like to add weight to it. I'm going to get a wide stance. That's important. I don't want you here. I want you wide enough so that you can comfortably drop your hips straight down and back up. Where I'm applying force into the ground matters. So I want weight mid-foot to heel. That's important. So you'll see as I drop down, this is my down position, knees kind of just above the ground here. If you, I don't know if you guys can see my foot in there, but if you looked at it, you would notice that the weight is kind of centered, not in my toes. That's important. Down, up, down, up, down, up. Generally what happens when we start applying force through the front of the foot, it's because our knee's coming way forward. We're putting a lot of stress in the knee. We're shifting our weight too far forward. So we want to avoid doing something like that. And that's why I say hips shouldn't have any forward movement. They should just come straight down. If I'd like to add weight to that, it really kind of just depends on where you're at. What you would do, grab your weight, get into position here, get nice and stable, down, up, down, up. So moving on to squat, I want you to practice just a sit to stand exercise first if you've never squatted before. It's just to help you get into the right position. So first things first, I'm going to sit down with just my butt on the bench or the chair. Feet are going to be kind of just outside of shoulder width, little slight turnout with the toes there, nothing extreme. Really it's kind of about comfort. There are some individual differences, but most are going to have a slight turnout. And what I want to focus on is just how I'm shifting my weight as I get in and out of my chair or on off my bench here. So I lean forward, shoulders are going to come forward. Again, trying to keep that neutral spine. I'm going to stand up. There's kind of my squat. As I come back, shift my weight back into my hips. I can sit all the way down. That's fine to start. Just to get that idea of shifting your weight back into your hips, weight mid-foot to heel. So shifting back, I can sit all the way down. That's fine. When you kind of get that weight shift down, then I still want you to keep the chair, the bench here. What I'm going to do is just a nice tap. Tap, up. Tap, up. There we go. So again, shifting my weight back into my hips, back into my heels, my midfoot heels. That's important. So once we moved on from the bench, you've kind of got the squat down, the movement down. You can just move on to body weight squats without. Same footing, again, shifting the weight back into the hips here. I like the idea of the bench as well because it teaches decent range of motion. Range of motion, I mean, it will depend on what you feel comfortable with and in your own, joints and how great they feel while you're doing all these things. Generally speaking, this is a younger, probably healthier crowd, so most of us likely can get to about parallel, which is here, which is important because you get a lot of benefit out of it. the better your range of motion, the more you're gonna get out of the exercise. So once you've moved on from bodyweight squats, you can go to a goblet squat. I'm going to hold my weight close to my body, nice and tight. Again, same footing, trying to keep that torso a little bit upright here just because of where my weight is. Shifting back, again, back in the hips, back in the hips. If you're holding the weight in front of you, where your knees end up going, where the weight is kind of in your feet, might be just slightly different. You're gonna get a little more forward motion with the knee. Weight might kind of move more center foot. I still want to make sure that I am not squatting into my toes. Knees should not, I shouldn't be shifting my weight into my knees like this on any kind of squat, whether it be the bench, body weight, later on you'll see with the barbell. I always want to think about weight in my hips. I'm just making a point that depending on where you're holding your weight, your squat might just look a little bit different. All right, so last but not least, we're gonna move on to the deadlift with dumbbells. So we're going to do what's called a Romanian deadlift or a stiff leg deadlift. It just means there's a little bit less bend in the knee, or the hips come not as close to the floor. I'm sorry guys. But anyway, I prefer that with the dumbbells because as we're holding the dumbbells, they're right in front of us and they're a little bit bulky. So sometimes having to get down with the hips into more of a conventional deadlift, which you'll see with the barbell later, it's just a little bit awkward. So I'm going to teach you a Romanian deadlift. You're going to need 2 dumbbells, or again, 2 anything weighted that you can work with. Let's see here. I'm just going to grab, I think, my 15s, although don't be afraid to go heavier on this one. You're utilizing a lot of musculature. So I'm standing nice and tall, neutral spine. This is a big one. This one's probably the hardest exercise to kind of keep yourself in that neutral spine the whole time, especially if your weights are starting to get more challenging. So that's where I really want you to think about it. So this is essentially a hip hinge. What I want to do is initiate movement with my hips. I'm going to set them back, legs stay fairly straight, although I am going to get a little bit of bend in the knee, especially depending on how flexible you are. I am not. I have very tight hamstrings. Those of you who have very flexible hamstrings might end up with almost perfectly straight legs, just a little bit of loose or softness in the knees. That's just fine too. Whatever works for you, whatever allows you to feel just a little bit of a stretch in the hamstrings. So here, this is where I have to work on keeping my neck in line as well. Down, up, hinging back with the hips. As you can see, weight stays close the whole time. And I'm back up. Take a look at the lumbar spine. It's staying in position. I'm avoiding doing something like this where I just kind of relax, bend over, drop my weights, come back up. Okay? Not good, especially if, again, you're challenging yourself and you're using weight that could cause injury, which we never want. Okay guys, so now that we got through just kind of the basic exercises to get started with, go over, we'll talk for a minute about how to program them. I always follow guidelines from American College of Sports Medicine. That's what all of my certifications have been through, so I'm most familiar. For beginners or those kind of getting back into it, Stick to 8 to 12 repetitions of your exercise. Repetitions, number that you do in a row. So bicep curl, 1, 2, 3, 4, you get it, that's my repetitions. 2 to 3 sets, 2 to 3 rounds of each exercise. You can rest in between each set. That's one way of doing it. You still should build up some strength, little bit of muscle size. When I say size, I don't want you to freak out like, if I lift weights, it's going to make me masculine looking. I mean, you have to be lifting very, very, very heavy weights, eating a surplus of calories, probably need a little bit of extra testosterone to get that big. So I don't want you to freak out about that. You might just see some, I guess you can call it toning. I kind of hate that word, but look a little more fit or athletic looking. But anyway, back to what I was saying. You can rest in between sets, or if you'd like to make the workout a little bit more metabolic, get the heart rate up, maybe help to burn off a little extra calorie there, I would suggest doing like a circuit. So circuit style workout where you're jumping from one exercise to the next without resting in between until you get to the end. Do like a circuit of 3, so working different muscle groups with each exercise, a push, a pull, a lower body rest, push, pull, lower body rest, something like that. And if you need more info, just reach out to me. Let's see, anything else just kind of basic for beginners? I mean, not that I can think of off the top of my head, guys. But it's getting later, it's been a long day, so again, you have questions, reach out to me. You have just general exercise related questions, reach out there too. As you can see, I put my gloves on because we're going to be getting into some barbell training. You can wear gloves for your dumbbell stuff or your lighter stuff. I don't know that it's as necessary until you're getting into heavier weights or working with barbells, but by all means, if you feel like you're getting a little callousy here, go ahead, pick up some lifting gloves. So next we'll move on to barbell training, and hopefully we'll have some stuff for those who have been lifting a while. Even if you haven't, that's just fine. There's still useful information there. I just tend to associate some of the barbell training with already being a little bit familiar with the movements. If you're not, that's okay though. So yeah. Alright guys, for the barbell section, I want to go over a couple of things you might need, or really you should get if you're going to get really into lifting. I mentioned gloves, that's optional. Just be aware that you start working with barbells and this texture, the knurling on the barbells, does cut into your hands. The other thing I want you to think about, I don't even know if you can see my foot right now, but what you're wearing on your feet. Ideally, you want shoes with just a nice, flat, thin sole. So running shoes actually aren't a good choice. They're kind of squishy, you get some shock absorption there. You want something, again, just thin, flat, kind of hard surface. With that said, we're gonna start with a bench press. All barbells, at least that you're gonna find at the gym, weigh 45 pounds. Even getting started, beginner, usually most can lift the bar at least for a few reps. If you've been strength training a little bit, I'm hoping, there's no issue there, but you can always work your way up to it. So with a bench press, just like with a dumbbell bench, I want to make sure that when I lay back, my feet are contacting the floor, my butt and my shoulder blades are contacting the bench here. And I'm going to line up so that my eyes are just underneath my barbell. I want a grip width, same as dumbbell here, about a 45-degree bend in the shoulder. There's a little play with it for comfort, a little narrower, a little wider. A little narrower, gonna hit kind of the triceps, front part of the delts here. A little bit wider, a little bit more pec involvement. But the movement's not going to be grossly different. So kind of find what's comfortable for you. I'm gonna roll my bar out to the end of the clips here, and I'm going to, or the hooks, I'm sorry, and I'm going to just make sure I'm set up on the bench nicely how I want to be. From there, nice grip, lift up, over the chest, down, press all the way up, down, press all the way up, down to the chest, all the way up. As you press up, the bar is going to end up a little bit above the chest. That's just fine. That's a natural like line of motion. When I'm done, all the way back till it hits the rack, down. And that's my barbell bench. Okay, so we're gonna move on to a squat next. I am gonna go over bench, squat, deadlift, just because, I mean, one, I'm biased because I used to power lift and that's what I did. But also things like military pressing, overhead pressing, you have to be able to lift a 45-pound bar over your head, and unless you've been training that for a little bit, I think it's a challenge. So we're just gonna nix that one. Stick to your dumbbells. If that's something you're interested in, you know, on your own time, just hit me up and we'll go over it. But I want to show you this. So I think this freaks people out, the rack. There are squat racks, power racks. The squat rack is just gonna have this kind of front portion. A lot of gyms have them. Power rack is more like cage style. Doesn't really matter. You can set them up to squat. Obviously the squat rack is, you know, it's right there in front of you, but if your hooks are back here on a power rack, just move them forward. You can squat with them. Safeties down here move as well, so you want to set those up just right at kind of the bottom of your squat. I'm not going to even show you on here. This brand of equipment is not what most like commercial gyms have, so just play around with it. I know it's scary, but once you get it, you've got it, and then you can just go for it and do it. So safeties adjust. Your J hooks here are going to adjust. So I'm going to take my barbell off and I'm going to adjust for a squat. So taking my hook here, I'm going to place it so it can kind of figure out, you know, what's going to make sense. I'm going to place it so that it's just below the height of my shoulder, and I'm going to do it on both sides. So look here, 1, 2, 3. That's how I like to measure, like to look at one side. 1, 2, 3, going up like that, and we're hooked. All right, so I'm gonna put my barbell up there and get this bench out of the way. Okay, a couple kinds of squats you can do with a barbell. Well, front squat, we're holding the bar in front, we're not even going to touch that. High bar squatting and low bar squatting, and that's just the position of the barbell. Most are going to do high bar, or at least start with high bar, meaning it's resting kind of right here up on the top of my traps. My traps are here. From there, I'm going to get underneath, get my footing in kind of a squat position, lift up. Then I can step out. Re-racking, make sure you hit the rack, set it down. Low bar, I'm not gonna actually squat low bar for you right now. But what I'm gonna do, take a little bit wider grip, and the bar's going to be placed a little bit lower, kind of on the back side of my deltoids, my shoulder muscles. Powerlifters do that, usually because you can lift more weight with it. Not really something you need to know unless you really want to get into it, which, again, get a hold of me separately. But for now, we'll stick to the high bar squat. Okay, so for a high bar squat, I switched out my shoes. They look like this. Why did I do that? Because I like to get a low squat, and I don't have the greatest ankle mobility. So these shoes have a little bit of a heel lift. They're actually made for the Olympic lifts, which again, not something we're gonna touch. But in case you were wondering what was going on there, as for you at home, you don't need a special shoe. Just don't squat as low if your ankles don't allow it, or your hips don't allow it, or your knees don't allow it. Squat to where you feel kind of comfortable. Hopefully that's at least parallel, but you're gonna see I'm gonna get hopefully pretty low on this. I like to increase my range of motion here. Kind of, again, most bang for your buck situation. So, grip's gonna be kind of just outside of shoulder width, getting underneath the bar, making sure it's stable on my traps, underneath with a squat stance, and I'm going to lift up, take a little step back. First things first, make sure my footing looks good, okay? So I want to make sure I'm in a nice squat stance. Once I'm there, just like before, just like with the body weight, the dumbbells, shifting my weight back, sitting down and up. Sitting back into my hips and up. Back into my hips and up. Trying to maintain somewhat of an upright torso. Of course, I'm going to lean forward a bit. Shoulders will lean forward a bit as I'm squatting. That's totally normal. But basically, I don't want to be collapsing under the bar here. I do not want to lose tightness in my core and my abs to the point where I'm falling forward. So, I'm out of breath already. When I'm done, I'm going to step forward. Again, make sure you hear that hit the rack, and I'm up above the hook. Set it down. With these shoes, I could probably have this rack just a little bit higher, actually. All right, so last but not least, we have the deadlift. Works a ton of muscles. If I could only do one exercise for the rest of my life, I think this would be it. What I want you to take note of before we get started, the plates I have on here are bumper plates. These are 25 on each side, and the reason I'm pointing it out is because bumper plates have the same diameter, regardless of how heavy they are or what the weight is. This is 10 pounds. It's nice when you're using something less than 45 because the height is what you want it to be. At the gym, you're gonna get the metal plates. The 45s are the same diameter as that. Everything else is gonna be a little bit smaller. So if you have something smaller on there, I'll show you as we get going here. You're either just going to keep the bar up or the weight above the floor, or you can grab a step, like aerobic step, and place it underneath each side, so each plate over there. So from here, getting set up with my deadlift, we're doing a conventional deadlift, so a little bit different than the Romanian or the stiff leg. Hips are going to come a little bit lower to the ground here. All right, so setting up, I want my bar to be about mid-foot or maybe even slightly back towards me. I'm going to first get my grip down here, figure out where I want my hands. They're going to be about shoulder width, maybe slightly wider than shoulder width. Basically, when my knees come forward, they're just right outside of my knees here. So here, hopefully after all this talk about neutral spine, you know that this is not my starting position. What I want to do is get into position. So that's what I'm going to think about first. I'm lowering my hips, I'm getting into that neutral spine, so getting nice and tight in the back, shoulder blades kind of together, just looking kind of straight down forward here, just so that my neck is in line as well. From here, nice tight grip, I'm going to push through my heels, lift, and that's my top position. Hinge at the hips to get back, down, up, up, down. If you're lifting anything real heavy, we're not going to talk about Valsalva, which is a maneuver, a breathing maneuver for lifting very heavy weight. But I do want you to focus on, we will talk about breathing just a bit here. I want you to focus on your inhale, exhale. So inhale, exhale as you come up. Inhale, exhale. Okay, so we can see it from the side, getting underneath the bar, getting my grip down first. Here's where I want it. I'm going to get into position, dropping the hips. Hips should be height-wise in between knee, shoulders. I'm going to make sure I'm nice and tight. Breathe in, out, in. Okay, so we can see it from the side, getting underneath the bar, getting my grip down first. Here's where I want it. I'm going to get into position, dropping the hips. Hips should be height-wise in between knee, shoulders. I'm going to make sure I'm nice and tight. Breathe in, out, in. And I end where I started. All right, ladies, so I tried to fit in as much as I could with the time that I had. If you have questions or you need help setting up an exercise routine, whatever it may be, I'm happy to be a resource for you. Just get a hold of me. And I hope you guys learned at least something out of this video. Thanks.